Okay, Jesus Storytime Part 8. I'm just going to title this probably like more on miracles or something like that. There's a bunch of stuff. This one's not going to be necessarily like a long, like drawn out story or a narrative like some of my others. I'm just going to jump around. I probably won't remember everything I'm supposed to say, but I'm just going to go through a few of the miracles. Again, I haven't read the Bible in a long time, so I'm not going to get into great detail about these things, but there are things that when I read these things, they stand out to me as something important. And so I'm just going to share some of those and just sort of generally how Jesus goes around doing things. Because I talked about how in Miraculous Jesus, about how being, all things being created through him and him being truth incarnate. And so how, like the rest of us, we perceive reality. If we clearly perceive reality, we're seeing truth. But Jesus being truth, what he sees becomes reality, and he's in the present moment, and there's no before or after in the spiritual realms. And so for him, perceiving clearly and things becoming what he perceives are the same, at least in the kingdom. They happen simultaneously. All of the miracles, all of them work because Jesus is in the present moment. If Jesus wasn't in the present moment, these things couldn't take place. And there's now obviously different miracles take place in different ways, but you do see certain patterns as far as how Jesus goes about doing things. One, like I said, when in the first Jesus Storytime Part 1, like when the first ministry he had providing people with clean water, and he didn't want to let people know that he was making it clean. And so he's always got that introverted thing. Jesus goes to parties, but Jesus never throws a party. There's no record of Jesus ever laughing. Maybe he laughed, but he obviously, he probably was more of a somber or serious person. And at least during his ministry, knowing what was happening, what he had to do, I guess that would be pretty sobering. But and then there's things like the shortest verse in the entire Bible is right before Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. It says Jesus wept. Now, everyone that I've talked to believes Jesus wept because Lazarus was dead, which is completely ridiculous, because Lazarus at that point in time was not dead. Jesus was getting them to roll away the stone so he could tell Lazarus to come out. Two things were happening. One, everybody around Jesus was crying, and so Jesus, being a telepath, probably an empath, was picking up on their sadness. But it was because Lazarus was fine. What was not fine was that crowd of people. The only reason those people were crying is because they didn't believe. He was crying because of the lack of faith of the people, the fact that people didn't believe him. And once Lazarus comes out, they don't have the opportunity to believe, him. They're just going to believe because Lazarus came out. So basically, Jesus, for some reason, had the expectation that the people would believe him. And when they all didn't, then that just broke him to his core, because he just realized like he was alone and all these people didn't believe. So he was crying for them, and he was crying for himself. Because that's another thing too, because he wants to empower people. Like everywhere he goes, he's telling people to do this and do that. Like he wants, like the servants, he turns the water into wine, but he has the servants do it and deliver it. During the feeding of the 5,000, it says Jesus feeds the 5,000. When he clearly does not feed the 5,000, he asks the disciples, he gives them in John, he gives them a test. He's like, it's like all these people are if they try to go back home at this point, they're gonna faint along the way. And he's like, you give them something to eat. So he's testing their faith, and then they're like the ones, I see this kid with like a loaf and a fish or whatever, maybe enough to feed the kid or whatever. And then somehow they split that up into the 12 of them, and all 12 of them go and feed 5,000 people. Jesus breaks the bread at the beginning, gives thanks to God, and then that's the thing where what Jesus sees becomes true. So Jesus recognizes that God's feeding the 5,000 people and being truth incarnate by him perceiving God. When he gives thanks, the only way Jesus could give thanks to God for feeding 5,000 people is if he sees that God's about to do that. And so that's Jesus's faith that's going to happen. But it's the disciples that go out and feed the people. Jesus doesn't feed anybody. Jesus breaks the bread, and then the disciples feed. And it says everyone eats their fill, and then there's baskets left over, because that's when God works. Normally there's going to be an abundance. Like if you have faith, like it's easy to have the kind of faith where you ask for what you need, but then to have the expectation that God's going to surpass that, by more than you can imagine or whatever, that's another level of faith. And that's the level of faith Jesus had. Jesus knew his Father was generous and that was going to happen. But the baskets were, this might seem obvious, but the baskets were actually for the disciples because they hadn't eaten yet. And so the question is, could any of those disciples eat everything in the basket and not be full? And so that's why the baskets were overflowing, because there was an overflowing amount of food for all the 5,000 people, and now the disciples could feed themselves with that kind of abundance. So, but, again, so, and then Lazarus comes out, like, he doesn't tell Lazarus to raise from the dead. So, okay, anyway, another one, like I told you about, how the woman with the bleeding disorder, she went through the crowd, and everyone she touched in the crowd became unclean until she touched Jesus and became clean. And Jesus, knowing what she did, still gave her his blessing and commended her faith, because he commends faith. Like, for example, there's the one where Jesus is in some sort of dwelling place, like a hut or something, and he's preaching or whatever, and the place is full and it's crowded outside. And I think this is the one where his family, his mom and brothers and sisters, try to get to him and save him because they all think he's insane. And he says the famous thing, like, the people, these are my brothers and sisters. Basically, he's talking about the people of the kingdom are his real brothers and sisters, not his natural family, who's obviously doesn't believe him, But I think it might not be the same one, but basically these friends, basically there's this guy who's paralyzed and he's on a cot, and they can't get into the place where Jesus could heal their friend. So they actually climb up on the place. It's a thatched roof. They make a hole in the roof and they lower their friend down, I guess on ropes, onto the ground while in the middle of Jesus talking. Now, what a lot of people, the logical thing to do would be like, hey, wait your turn, stand in line with everybody else. You're cutting in line. But again, just like the woman inconvenienced all those people, making them unclean, these guys cut in line, but it was their faith. Basically, they had more faith than anybody else because other people were standing in line, but these guys, 100% knew if they could just get to Jesus, it would be okay. And one of the things too, it says, pick up your mat and walk. So why is he saying pick up your mat? It's because if he were to bypass the fact, he's like, your faith has healed you. Well, if he were to heal someone that didn't have faith, they wouldn't pick up their mat. They might stand up, but then they would be like, oh, I don't know how long this is going to last, or when am I going to get, I might get worse again. And then inevitably that mindset does make them get worse. And so their mat's still on the ground. Basically, their mat's on the ground because they're anticipating needing to use it again. And so, like, when feeding the 5,000, he commands everyone to sit down. Raising Lazarus, he commands them to roll back the stone. So basically, when Jesus commands someone, like, pick up your mat, basically the person's picking up his mat because Jesus tells them to do that, because when they do that, that's their faith in action, stating that they're healed permanently. So, and, or like another thing Jesus will do, stand, like, or he'll like stretch out your hand or something. He doesn't command people to, be healed or whatever, like a faith preacher or on a televangelist preacher or whatever. There was one scene where the Pharisees were trying to pin on him, like, you can't heal on the Sabbath because that counts as working, and he knows what they're thinking, and it makes him really upset. And so he basically provokes them. He's like, oh, okay, so it's going to be like that. Well, I'm going to, reveal your corrupted hearts. And, but the guy with the withered hand, he doesn't tell it to be healed. He tells the guy to stretch out his hand. Now, if you're the guy with the withered hand, let's say just imagine you have a withered hand, however long, and someone says, hey, stretch out your hand. What's the first thing you're going to think about? You're going to be thinking about, you dumb fuck, I can't stretch out my hand. It's fucking withered. So when Jesus commands that guy to stretch out his hand, it's instantaneous. I go back about, was the hand healed before he said that, or was the hand healed after he said that? Because basically, again, Jesus saw that the hand was healed before the guy stretched it out. That's why Jesus told him to stretch out his hand, because he saw the hand was healed. The guy didn't realize the hand was healed. By stretching out his hand, he did the faith into action thing to demonstrate he did believe his hand was healed, because the only way you can stretch out your withered hand is if you believe there's some chance that it's healed. Because if you think there's no chance that it's healed, then it's just a stupid command. You just think it's stupid. So again, it's the guy's faith, but it's still Jesus' perception of the truth of the situation. Like, Jesus perceived Lazarus was alive. Jesus perceived the hand was healed. Jesus perceived their girl was asleep. Like, this goes on and on and on and on and on. Because what you call the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of truth, and you say the Holy Spirit heals, but when you see the Holy Spirit heal something to the natural mind, it's not healed till after the action, I think, if that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, so stand up and take your mat and walk or whatever. And so the guy's laying on the ground. He still thinks he's paralyzed, but Jesus tells him to get up. He's like, well, I must be well. And if Jesus says it, I'm just, yeah. So, or sit down, I'm going to feed you. Well, Jesus is saying he's going to feed us in the middle of the wilderness or desert or whatever with no food anywhere. Well, let's just sit down or whatever. And, there's the guy. This is beautiful, because if you talk about, these people having the faith to stretch out their hand and to stand and all this and the whatever, all these things. One man, a father, and his son, who I believe was a child, was demon possessed to the extent where he was, it was scary demon possession. I can imagine, I'm not a father, but from what I've seen with good fathers with their children, this would be devastating to this man. And Jesus will oftentimes is like, do you believe, da-da-da-da-da, and then he says, based off what you believe, so be it done to you. It's like, it's not that their belief causes them to be healed, it's that Jesus isn't going to do something more than what they consider to be a possibility. He could do more than what they consider to be a possibility, but then they would go back, they would doubt it, and then it would undo what he did ultimately. Or it could. Maybe not always. But this father, he asked his father if he, again, it's so long since I've read this, I don't know exactly what he asked, but basically he's like, do you believe I can cast this out? And that's not something Jesus would ask. I know that's not what was written in the Bible. He wouldn't ask it that way. He probably asked it something like, do you believe in the, power of the Son of Man or something like that? And the father, this is why Jesus casted out the kid. The father could have been like, oh yeah, I believe. Yeah, do it. Yeah. But he was a good man, and he was honest, and he was skeptical. He was a skeptic. And he told that to Jesus, despite the fact that Jesus was there, and he wanted Jesus to do everything for his son. And by saying that, he could be condemning his son to continually be possessed. And he told Jesus, help me in my unbelief. And then it says Jesus saw a crowd approaching. So he, and again, it doesn't exactly say what the link is. I'm assuming, because a lot of times Jesus will heal someone or do something, and then he'll tell the people involved, like, oh, don't tell anybody. And again, I've heard some people interpret that as Jesus being like, yeah, if I tell them not to tell people, they'll tell more people and my name will spread, which I believe is completely arrogant. But one of the things Jesus doesn't want, like when it says the people were hungry, the 5,000 or 3,000 people were hungry, and he had compassion on them. Part of the compassion is that some of these people don't, he doesn't like demonstrating things in public like that. That was a miracle that made him very public, and he did it anyway. So that was a sacrifice on his part. And when he's casting out this demon in this boy and the crowd's coming, he does it before they get there because he doesn't want people to see. He doesn't want people to see, and he doesn't want people to know. And his name's spreading, and, part of it, he needs his name to spread, to fulfill, basically to piss off the Pharisees enough to where they'll finally kill him. Because actually, I don't know which book it is, but the decision finally to kill Jesus comes because too many people believe in him, and the Pharisees are threatened by that. There's a very specific passage where the Pharisees are getting together and decide to kill him because there's too many people. So he knows that's the limit raging. He knows when it gets to that a certain point, then that's when it's going to happen. And so he might be trying to limit that, based off a timeline, but more than likely is that he just, he's an introvert. He's an introvert. He doesn't want people to see. When he raised the girl, he made sure only 3 people or 4 people were in the room with him. He's not a show-off. Okay, that much is clear. He's not, he doesn't show off. He can do all these things, and I would say most people alive today would be showing off how awesome they are. They can do these things, and nobody else can do them or whatever. And Jesus is the opposite. He can do these amazing things, and he doesn't, and it's almost like he's bashful about it. He doesn't want people to think of him more highly than he is, I guess, which is why he refers to himself in the third person and speaks in parables. and he does everything low key. At one point, you say Jesus doesn't lie, but he kind of did lie in that one passage about how he told people, he's going to stay somewhere, and they go on into the city or whatever, and then he follows them. It's like, okay. But oh God, what other miracles are there? But anyway, so even like people talk about like it's not faith that does these things, because a lot of people will be like, oh, my faith just isn't good enough for this. It's not faith that does these things, it's God that does these things. And so even with the skeptic father, Jesus still casts out the demon because of his integrity or whatever. Jesus commended him, blessed him. He's like, okay, so if you're gonna be honest with me and say that you probably don't believe, I'll just do it anyway. So put your faith in God. God does things. Don't trust your faith, because if you think your faith is doing it, then when you have low faith, it cycles down, because you'll have lower faith because you don't trust your faith. It makes it lower or whatever. You just don't want to be in that place. So, and this is the part where I'm probably going to be forgetting one of the miracles I wanted to talk about before I started this video. Oh God. Oh yeah. One of the things too about, the Immaculate Jesus, being God, can snap his fingers and anything can happen. There was a blind man. Jesus spit into the dirt, made mud, rubbed it on his eyes, and voila, he can see. Wrong. He opened his eyes and he looked, and Jesus knew he might not be able to see. He asked him, what do you see? And he said he could see like the outline of trees or something like that. And so and then he didn't correct it. He just did the same thing again, I think. I'm pretty sure he just did the same thing again, and then he could see. So anybody out there believing in God and, casting out demons and healing people, if you get to, get someone, you don't get it right the first time, or, there'll always be improvement. But if it's not 100%, don't give up. Don't be because this is what people will do that don't believe. People, if you try to heal people that don't believe, which Jesus never did for this reason, they'll say you'll improve, whatever it is, it gets cut in half, but it's still there, but it's cut in half. They'll immediately assume that that's all you can do. You had your chance. This is absolute everything, and they all do that. Everybody without faith will do that. They'll let you try once, and then that's it. And then with this case, even Jesus had to do a healing twice. And I think that's the only time he had to do it twice. But it still shows, they put that in the Bible probably for that reason, to let people know, hey, if it doesn't work out the first time, keep trying, that kind of thing. I saw a guy on YouTube the other day fix a kid's back. He had to do it 3 times, and he had a whole group of people working with him. And but he was demonstrating to a crowd of people that didn't believe, and the kid believed enough to let him try. And it was like a 10 that went down to a 9, and then a 6, and then a 0. And so yeah, if anybody's watching this and you want to try this stuff out, just take heart that something changed and keep trying. And I think that's it. I'm sure there's more. I guess I'll pick it up on a different video. Sorry if I look a little tired. I'm probably a little more cranky than my other videos. I really don't care. This isn't about me. These videos aren't about me. I don't care how I talk or how I come across. I'm in my fucking car on a cell phone. I don't care. There's just things that I'm saying that people need to hear so they can think about things a certain way, because 10 years ago, if I was watching the video I'm making right now, my mind would be fucking blown. And so I'm hoping the people that watch this, younger people or people, that haven't thought about this stuff yet, they'll read it, and then it'll they'll make the connections, and then they'll start thinking of things on their own they hadn't thought before, that maybe, even, not Jesus, but it's not a progression. It's not like you think of something and then it gets more advanced and you more advanced, more advanced. Part of following God is the renewing of being, you're a beginner, you're a child. And then what ends up happening, the backflow, is when you start getting more advanced, if you feel that way, then you stagnate, and then you have to go back to 0 and start where you are. So all these things, are simple, and anything with God, any revelation with God is going to be simple. So, and there's always more. There's an infinite amount of more stuff. You can read the Bible. You can read one of the books, and I'll get 10 things out of one chapter, and then someone else will get 20 completely different things. So these are the ones that I'm bringing to the table. I hope you guys enjoyed them. Have a good day.